Imagine a class of students, vibrant and full of life, suddenly vanishing from all records in 1930. Fast forward 45 years, and a determined sheriff stumbles upon a clue that could unravel the mystery. What he discovers will leave you speechless. Stay tuned as we dive into this chilling tale of disappearance and discovery. In 1930, an entire class of 50 indigenous students vanished from an Arizona boarding school without a trace. Their disappearance buried in forgotten case files and silence. But over 4 decades later, a newly elected sheriff discovers a shocking detail, something everyone before had overlooked, a crucial piece of evidence that would finally solve the 45-year-old mystery. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on Red. Harvest, Arizona, a remote town nestled near the Arizona-New Mexico border that seemed forgotten by time itself in 1975. The town bore the scars of its troubled past. Once home to a federal Indian boarding school in the early 1900s, it had begun its decline in the 1950s, the 1930s, when racial segregation intensified, leaving behind a tense, decaying place, riddled with high-crime economic hardship and wounds that refused to heal. Sheriff Walter Claiborne, 48 years old and recently elected, stood in an alley that reeked of decay and desperation. 2 small bodies lay crumpled against the brick wall, their dark hair matted with blood. Indigenous children no more than 12 or 13 years old. Walter crouched beside them, his weathered hands trembling slightly. As he examined the scene, he noticed defensive wounds on their small hands, signs they had fought back against their attackers. He photographed the crime scene with the department's old camera. Walter's mind churned with the bitter reality of Red. Harvest, the hate and racial tension between whites and indigenous people, had reached a boiling point since most boarding schools were shutting down. Crimes were skyrocketing. Indigenous homelessness plagued the streets and chaos hung thick in the air like desert dust. Walter marked the positions of evidence with chalk, his stomach turning as he catalogued each brutal detail. The sight of these innocent children discarded like refuse in this forgotten alley overwhelmed him. How many more had he? Like this, how many families were mourning children who would never come home? "I can't," he muttered to Deputy Martinez, who was securing the perimeter. "I need a moment." Martinez nodded. "Understandingly, take your time, Sheriff, we've got this." Walter stumbled to his patrol car, his boots crunching on broken glass and debris. The drive back to the sheriff's station felt endless, each red light giving him more time to see those children's faces behind his closed eyelids. The sheriff's building stood like a weathered sentinel on Main Street. Its adobe walls cracked, but sturdy. Walter pushed through the heavy wooden doors and made his way to his office, collapsing into his chair. Deputy Carl Peterson, a veteran officer with graying temples, knocked and entered. "Rough scene out there, huh?" He set a cup of coffee on Walter's desk. "You shouldn't think too much about it, Walt. You'll get used to it. Eventually, we all do." Walter wrapped his hands around the warm mug. "I hope I never get used to seeing dead kids, Carl, but I do hope I get stronger. Something has to be done to stop this every day. Another indigenous child ends up dead. This town's looking more and more like..." Hal Peterson shrugged, his expression hardening. "This will only stop once all those Indians learn to live a civilized life like us." He turned and left, leaving Walter alone with his disgust. Walter couldn't believe that even his fellow officers were clouded by such prejudice. He sat in silence, letting the coffee's warmth seep into his bones after gathering his strength. He stood and walked down the narrow hallway to the archive room. The archive room smelled of old paper and dust metal shelves, stretched from floor to ceiling, packed with cardboard boxes and manila folders. Walter began pulling files on cases involving indigenous victims, searching for patterns. similarities, anything that might help identify who was behind these murders hours. Past files and archive boxes littered the floor around him. His eyes burned from reading faded type and handwritten notes. Then in the back corner of the room, he noticed a small door marked pre-1940 storage, curious about older patterns of violence. He tried the handle, it was locked, but the wood around the latch was rotted a firm push, and it gave way inside cobwebs draped over boxes that hadn't been touched in decades. Walter pulled a particularly dusty box from the top shelf, coughing as particles. Filled there the label barely legible. Read 1930 missing persons. Federal investigation. Walter carried the box back to better light and opened it carefully. Inside were case files documenting the disappearance of an entire class of 50 indigenous children from the local boarding school. They had simply vanished from all records in 1930. Walter remembered this case. Everyone in Red Harvest knew about it, though most preferred to keep quiet. His own grandfather had been the investigating officer. Walter had seen many terrible things, but this case had always shocked and baffled him. An entire class couldn't just vanish. Something deeper, darker must have happened. He gathered the files and returned to his office, spreading them across his desk. As he studied the documents, a black and white photograph caught his eye. It showed the missing class posed in front of the school children in uniform rows. Their faces, solemn but in the background, partially visible, was a moving truck. Walter squinted, making out the lettering on its side. Esch Styles Moving Company. His pulse quickened. That company still operated in Red Harvest. He'd seen their trucks around town just this week. Deputy Miguel Herrera walked past the open door, then doubled back. What are you doing with that old case? Walter looked up after today's crime scene. I needed to understand the history. This case from 1930. 50 indigenous children vanishing. It connects somehow. I feel it in my bones. These people have suffered for so long. Miguel, someone needs Tukari. Herrera shook his head. It's useless and hopeless. Picking up such an old case, Walter focus on current cases. He paused, then added, Oh, and don't forget your appointment with Mayor CR. Not sure what it's about, but probably something regarding the upcoming election. Walter glanced at his watch. Damn, I almost forgot. Thanks, Miguel. He secured the case files in his desk drawer, locking it carefully. The photograph with the moving truck lingered in his mind as he stood and straightened his uniform. Something about that company name nagged at him. He grabbed his hat and headed for the door, his footsteps echoing down the empty hallway. The late afternoon heat hit him like a wall as he stepped outside. City Hall stood just next door, its Spanish colonial architecture a reminder of the town's layered history. Walter walked across the scorched courtyard, his mind still turning over the day's discoveries. Children couldn't just disappear, and that moving truck in the photograph. It meant something. He was certain of it as he approached the mayor's office. Walter squared his shoulders. Whatever Mayor CR wanted, he would handle it professionally. But his thoughts remained with those 2 dead children in the alley, and the 50 who had vanished 45 years ago. As he ached for the handle, Walter froze outside Mayor Krantz's office, catching the sound of voices from within. In his rush, he'd forgotten to knock through the thick oak door. He could hear the mayor's unmistakable booming voice. Excellent work as always. Mayor CR was saying this new contract will benefit both the town and your company. Your consistent service and quality over the years speaks for itself. The pleasure is ours. Mayor came another voice, smooth and cultured. And we're grateful for SH Styles Moving Company's opportunity to support you in the coming election. Your vision for Red Harvest aligns perfectly with our business interests. Walter Froese. Moving Company, the name hit him like a physical blow. The same. Company from the 1930 photograph, the truck in the background. When 50 children vanished, his hand remained suspended over the door handle as his mind raced after 45 years. The company was still operating, still connected to town leadership. The door suddenly opened, and Walter found himself face to face with a well-dressed man in his 50s behind him. Mayor Kiar looked up from his mahogany desk. "Sheriff Claiborne," the mayor exclaimed. "We didn't hear you knock." Walter cleared his throat. "My apologies. Mayor CR, I didn't mean to interrupt." The well-dressed man smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "No harm done. We were just wrapping up." Mayor Krantz stood gesturing between them. "Sheriff, meet Simon H.
Stiles, drowner of S.H. Stiles Moving Company. They're one of our most important business partners in town." Walter shook the man's hand, noting the expensive gold watch and manicured nails. "Pleasure to meet you, Mr. Stiles." "Likewise, Sheriff. I've heard good."
"Things about your recent election, Stiles," turned to the mayor. "I'll let you gentlemen talk. Douglas, I'll see you at the club. Thursday, wouldn't miss it, Simon Mayor." CR walked Stiles out, their footsteps echoing down the marble hallway. Walter stood in the opulent office, studying the oil paintings of previous mayors. His eyes lingered on one from the 1930s, Franklin W. CR, the current mayor's grandfather. When Mayor CR returned, he closed the door firmly and gestured to a leather chair. "Sit, Walter, we need to discuss the upcoming election." Walter sat, his mind still processing the connection to S.H. Stiles. The mayor leaned forward, his hands clasped. "I need things to run smoothly and securely, especially with these rising criminal cases from the indigenous population. Today's murders, for instance. Voters are concerned, Walter. They want action. We're investigating thoroughly. Investigation isn't enough. CR interrupted to ensure my success. I need to prove there will be lower crime rates involving the indigenous community this month. I have a solution." Walter weighted his unease, growing relocation. The mayor said simply, Stiles Moving Company will help us achieve this goal. We need your department's support. To ensure the operation goes smoothly, I want you to develop a plan to anticipate any trouble and make this possible." Walter leaned back, choosing his words carefully. "Are you talking about an exodus of the indigenous community from Red Harvest?" "Exactly." The mayor's smile was cold. "We've arranged everything with Stiles. They'll be relocated to a place they deserve, somewhere better, where they can live peacefully without causing trouble in our town." "Which settlement?" Walter pressed. "Where exactly are they being moved?" The mayor waved dismissively. "Those details aren't your concern. Your job is to ensure law and order during the transition. Can I count on you?" Sheriff Walter felt trapped. Refusing would mean losing his position, any chance to protect these people, but agreeing felt like betrayal. "I'll need to review the legal framework." "The framework is solid." Krantz's tone borked no argument. "This is for everyone's benefit. Lower crime, better living conditions for them. Peace for our citizens. Win-win." The mayor stood, signaling the meeting's end. "Keep this confidential, Walter, but I want to see real results. I'll expect your plan update by week's end, Walter." Rose slowly. "Understood, Mayor." "Good man, I knew I could count on you." Walter left the office, his thought churning. The S.H. Stiles Moving Company, connected to the 1930 disappearances, and now to this new relocation. The mayor's grandfather had been in office when those 50 children vanished. Now his grandson was planning another removal. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows as Walter crossed the courtyard back to the sheriff's station. His grandfather's words echoed in his memory. "Sometimes the real criminals wear suits and shake your hand." He pushed through the station doors, his resolve hardening. Whatever was planned, he would uncover the truth. Those two dead children deserved justice, The 50 who vanished deserved answers, and he'd be damned if he'd let history repeat itself on his watch. Deputy Herrera was waiting in Walter's office. When he returned, case files spread across the desk. The younger man looked exhausted. His usually crisp uniform wrinkled from the long day, just finished interviewing the suspect in the children's murders. Herrera said, "Without preamble, thought you'd want an update." Walter sank into his chair. "How did it go?" "We found a 15-year-old day boy," Herrera began, consulting his notes. "Name's Thomas Bay, had blood on his hands. His fingerprints, all over a knife. We believe was the murder weapon. 15. Walter repeated, his heart sinking, just a child himself. "That's not the troubling part." Herrera flipped a page. The boy was in shock, speaking incoherently, kept rambling about a very hot place with red doors like a barn, but quiet and underground. We pressed him for allocation, but he couldn't or wouldn't say, seemed troubled, delirious. Even Walter straightened. Did he seem traumatized? Could he be a victim too? Herrera shrugged, but Walter caught the uncertainty in his eyes. Could be, but it's not looking good for him. His prints were everywhere, and no one saw anyone else near the scene. These people rarely harm their own. Walter insisted, especially not children killing children. There has to be another person involved. Probably, Herrera admitted. But you know how it is, these cases happen multiple times a week. Now the higher-ups want them closed quickly. They'll likely pin it all on the boy for convenience. The words hung heavy in the air. Walter felt a familiar sadness wash over him. Justice in Red Harvest was often about expedience, not truth. "Where's the boy now?" Walter asked. "Secured in cell 3, listed as a suspect. I'd like to talk with him." Herrera shook his head. "Give it some time. Walter, we just finished the interview and he's still badly shaken. I don't think he'll say anything coherent right now." Glancing at the wall clock, Herrera stood. "It's almost evening. Our shift's ending. We should head home." "I'll stay a bit longer," Walter said. "Can I see the interrogation report?" Herrera handed Haim a manila folder. "Don't stay too late. This case will still be here tomorrow." After Herrera left, Walter spread the interrogation report alongside the 1930 case files. The crime scene photos of the two girls were brutal, but he forced himself to study them objectively. The boy's statement was indeed fragmented, full of references to heat, darkness, and those mysterious red doors. Then he turned to the 1930 files. What he found made his blood run cold. There had been an investigation of the 50 missing students. 3 had been found, the official record stated. They'd been relocated, but victim statements were attached. 2 of the 3 survivors described being held in a very hot and dark room. Walter's hand trembled as he wrote a note connecting the testimonies. The similarity to Thomas Bay's rambling was too precise to be coincidence. Digging deeper into the boarding school records, he discovered something else the school had maintained, a close partnership with S.H. Styles Moving Company. Every field trip, every outing, every transportation need had been handled by them. This struck Walter as odd. Why would a moving company, not a bus service, handle school transportation? He pulled out the class photograph again. The children stood in neat rows, faces solemn, dressed in their boarding school uniforms. The caption read, "An annual field trip, May 1930. But instead of a school bus in the background, there was that moving truck. Why would children be loaded into a moving truck for a field trip? Walter continued searching through the records. There was no mention of any other transportation company ever being used by the school. S.H. Styles had held a complete monopoly. A thought struck him. What other assets did the company own? Did they have buses, Other vehicles, properties here ached for the phone and dialed a familiar number after 4 rings. A tired voice answered county recorder's office. Rebecca speaking. Rebecca, it's Walter Claiborne. I'm sorry for calling after hours, Walter. Her voice warmed. What are you doing working so late? I need a favor. Becca, it's important. She sighed. You always say that this time it's different. I need to look up properties owned by S.H. Styles Moving Company, physical records, deeds titles, ownership transfers, building permits, everything you have, Walter. You know, I can't just hand over records without proper paperwork, especially at this hour. It's related to today's murders. He pressed those 2 indigenous girls. I think there's a connection to something bigger, Becca. Something that goes back decades. There was a long pause. Rebecca had been his friend since high school. She knew him well enough to hear the urgency in his voice. Fine, she said, finally. But just this once. The office is closing now, but come by tomorrow morning. I'll have the records ready. Thank you, Becca. I owe you. You owe me dinner at that new steakhouse, she corrected, and an explanation deal. After hanging up, Walter slumped in his chair. His eyes burned from reading, and exhaustion weighed on his shoulders like a physical burden. The pieces were starting to form a picture, but it was still frustratingly incomplete. S.H. Styles Moving Company, the 1930 disappearances, the mayor's relocation plan, and the partnership with the same company. Thomas Bay's fevered words about red doors and underground heat. 2 dead girls in an alley. It all connected somehow, he was certain of it. Walter locked the case files in his desk drawer and stood his joints protesting. Tomorrow he would dig deeper tonight. Needed rest to think. Clearly, as he switched off the office lights, one last thought nagged at him. The boy's description of red doors and underground heat matched testimonies from 45 years ago. What kind of place had remained unchanged for so long, and what horrors had it witnessed in all those years? The evening darkness had settled over Red Harvest like a heavy blanket as Walter drove through the quiet streets toward home. His headlights cut through the gloom, illuminating abandoned storefronts and empty sidewalks. The town always felt different after dark, more menacing, as if the shadows hid secrets too terrible to face in daylight. A figure darted across the street ahead, caught briefly in his headlights. Walter slammed on the brakes, his tires squealing and indigenous. Boy, maybe 14 or 15, was running frantically down the middle of the road. No shoes, his clothes torn and shabby, but it was the look of pure terror on his face that made Walter's blood run cold. Walter pulled over and jumped out. Hey, he called, son. Wait, are you okay? Do you need help? The boy glanced back, his eyes wide with fear, but didn't stop, if anything. He ran faster, his bare feet slapping against the pavement. Walter gave chase his longer stride, slowly closing the distance. I'm not going to hurt you. I'm the sheriff. I can help. But the boy remained terrified. Weaving between parked cars, trying desperately to escape, Walter was about to catch up. When 2 men emerged from an alley, moving with practiced efficiency, they grabbed the boy, one wrapping thick arms around his thin frame while the other quickly bound his wrists with rope. The boy struggled wildly, crying out in a language Walter didn't understand, but the fear needed no translation. What's going on here? Walter demanded, his hand instinctively moving to his service weapon. The larger man, broad-shouldered with a scarred face, looked at Walter with annoyance. Didn't the mayor or your boss tell you we're cleaning the streets of these mongrels? The casual cruelty of the word made Walter flinch. The mayor had mentioned relocation, but Walter hadn't expected it to begin so soon or in such a brutal manner. I need to see your paperwork, Walter said firmly. The second man, younger with cold eyes, spat in the ground. You're on the wrong side here, Sheriff, if you want to be concerned. Be concerned with helping us catch these children. We were told to gather them for transport, they began. Walking toward a truck parked nearby, dragging the bound boy between them. Walter's heart sank. As she recognized the logo on the vehicle's side, Eshe Styles Moving Company, the paperwork. Walter repeated, following them with an exaggerated sigh. The scarred man pulled folded documents from his jacket. Walter examined them under a streetlight. Everything appeared legitimate. Mayor CR's signature, the S.H. Styles management approval, even Simon H. Styles, JRS personal authorization as they reached the truck. The men opened the back doors. Walter gasped inside, huddled together like frightened animals, where at least 20 indigenous children their ages ranged from perhaps 8 to 16. All with the same terrified expressions. Walter's mind raced, if he tried to stop. This he'd be going against direct orders from the mayor. He'd lose his badge any chance to investigate further. But watching these children being loaded like cargo made his stomach turn. This is the last one, the younger man said, shoving the new boy into the truck. Now we deliver them. Deliver them. Where Walter asked, "There's housing prepared," the scarred man replied. "They'll stay there temporarily until the permanent settlement is ready." Walter made a decision. "I'll escort you." The men exchanged glances, but couldn't refuse a sheriff's escort. Walter returned to his patrol car and followed the truck as it rumbled out of town. The journey took them deep into rural Arizona, following roads that grew progressively narrower and more isolated. Walter watched, his odometer noting they were heading northeast, away from any established settlements. He knew of the desert stretched endlessly on either side, broken only by scrub brush and the occasional Joshua tree. After nearly 2 hours of silent pursuit, the truck's brake lights suddenly lit up. It veered off the main road and into a small settlement. Dust swirling in their headlights, Walter parked and surveyed the area. Out of the darkness emerged a two-story rectangular structure surrounded by buildings of similar construction, but this one stood out enclosed by a chain-link fence crowned with barbed wire. A single gate offered entry, and the compound was drenched in the glare of harsh floodlights. It resembled a detention facility far more than temporary. "Housing? This doesn't look big enough for all these children," Walter observed. As the men began unloading their human cargo, the scarred man shrugged. "Not our problem." "Wounds this place," Walter pressed Eshe Styles. "Some private institution, the government. Look, Sheriff," the younger man said impatiently. "We don't know and we don't care. We're just following orders. Pick up the kids, bring them here, that's it." Walter watched as the children were herded out of the truck one by one. They moved slowly, stiff from the journey, fear evident in every hesitant step. Some of the younger ones were crying silently, tears streaming down their faces. A woman emerged from the building, heavy-set with a severe expression. She carried a clipboard and began checking off names as the children filed. "Past 23, she announced. When the last child had exited the truck, all accounted for, the men turned to Walter. "You should head back now." "Sheriff, we don't need an escort anymore." Walter nodded slowly, his mind already working tomorrow. He would meet with Rebecca, check property, records. He would ask the mayor for more details about this operation. He made a mental note to have Rebecca look up this specific property as well. He waited watching as the children were guided through the gate and handed off to another man waiting. Inside, the figure at the entrance accepted them without a word, ushering them quickly into the building's shadow. The boy who'd been running looked back, once his eyes meeting Walter's through the fence. The desperation in that gaze would haunt Walter. For days the gate clanged shut, the lock clicking into place with finality. The two men climbed back into their truck and started the engine. Walter returned to his patrol car, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. Something was terribly wrong. Here this didn't look like relocation. As he began the long drive back to Red Harvest, he watched in his rearview mirror as the S.H. Styles truck turned in the opposite direction, heading deeper into the desert. Walter had only been driving a few miles when he spotted the flickering neon sign of a gas station, a beacon of civilization in the empty desert. Walter pulled into the low, his head pounding with a vicious headache that had been building since he left the fenced housing. The events of the day, the murdered children, the old case files, the mayor's plans, and now this disturbing relocation pressed down on him like a physical weight. He needed food, coffee, and a moment to clear his head before the 2-hour drive back to Red Harvest after filling his tank. Walter entered the small convenience store. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, harsh after the darkness. Outside evening. Sheriff the clerk said, an older man with weathered hands and kind eyes. Long way from home, aren't you? Just passing through, Walter replied. Grabbing a pre-wrapped sandwich, a bag of chips, and a large coffee, he added a magazine about fishing, something to distract his mind during dinner back in his patrol car. Walter rolled down the windows, letting the cool desert air flow. Through he unwrapped his sandwich and took a bite. The coffee was bitter and hours old, but the caffeine was what he needed. He was halfway through his meal when movement in his rearview mirror caught his attention. A figure was creeping through the shadows at the edge of the parking lot, moving with the cautious stealth of someone who didn't want to be seen. Walter set down his sandwich and stepped out of his car. Ash moved closer. The figure resolved into the same indigenous boy from earlier. The one who'd been running, who'd been caught and bound. His hands were free now. Though rope burns marked his wrists, he was still barefoot, his feet bleeding from the rough terrain. Walter expected the boy to run again at the sight of him. Instead, the boy's face lit up with desperate hope. He ran toward Walter, not away. "You good police help," the boy said in broken English. His voice, without waiting for a response, he yanked open the patrol car's passenger door and jumped inside. "Wait, wait," Walter hurried after him, sliding into the driver's seat. "What are you doing? How did you escape?" "Help friends you drive." The boy pleaded, his dark eyes wide with urgency. "Why do you trust me?" Walter asked, bewildered. "You were running from me earlier." The boy studied him for a long moment, then said simply, "You good, I know drive ... Walter glanced around the empty parking lot. No one seemed to be pursuing the boy. The compound was just a turn away, and it was eerily quiet against his better judgment. He started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot. The boy's stomach growled audibly. Walter handed him the rest of his sandwich and chips. The boy fell on the food like he hadn't eaten in days, devouring everything, including gulping down Walter's coffee. See, the boy suddenly pointed ahead. Walter followed his gesture and saw the S.H. Styles truck returning to the compound. But something was wrong. He could see figures in the back, the same children who had just been unloaded. "They're loading them again," Walter muttered, confused. The truck pulled away from the compound, heading in the different direction from Walter's position. The boy grabbed Walter's arm, pointing frantically at the departing vehicle. "Save friends, follow, please." Walter hesitated. Every instinct told him to return to Red Harvest to report what he'd seen. But looking at the boy, his desperation, his obvious escape skills, the fact that he'd somehow gotten free and found Walter, he knew the child would just end up on the streets again. "All right," Walter decided, "I'll follow them. Maybe they're moving to another housing facility." That place was too small for so many children. He maintained a safe distance behind the truck, headlights off. Following the red tail lights through the darkness, the road wound deeper into the wilderness, leaving any pretense of civilization far behind. Saguaro cacti stood like silent sentinels in the moonlight, and the only sounds were the rumble of engines and the whisper of wind. Half an hour passed. The boy remained alert, eyes fixed on the truck ahead. Finally, the vehicle slowed and turned off the main road. Walter followed cautiously, seeing a large structure looming in the darkness. It was a warehouse, old and imposing, its metal sides rusted with age. A weathered sign near the entrance read Shial's Moving Equipment Storage Facility. Walter parked at a distance,